Transnet has posted a nearly 25% increase in profit for the year ending at the end of March. At its results presentation in Joburg today, the state-owned utility said the rise in profits was due to cost containment measures. The group also reported a 1.6% rise in annual revenue, but irregular expenditure increased from 8 billion rand to 49 billion rand in the same period. However, the acting Group Chief Executive Officer, Mohammed Mahomedy, is querying the irregular expenditure figure with the auditors. He says the controversial locomotive tender is included in the reporting period, which accounts for the figure ballooning to 49 billion rand. The Transnet's acting Group CEO, Mohammed Mahomedy, joins me now. Mr. Mahomedy, good evening. Thanks so much for coming in.
Good evening. We appreciate the time.
Let's start with that figure, that irregular expenditure figure. You say you're querying it. Why?
I think we're not querying the irregular expenditure figure. What we're querying is the auditor's decision to qualify Transnet's financial statements. And the qualification from the auditors is around irregular expenditure. And the query from our side is basically to review and re-look whether all of what the auditors believe should be irregular is actually irregular in terms of legislation and in terms of processes.
Okay, I mean, there's a long history to some of this money. 49 billion rand sounds like a lot. It all happened before you came into this particular position. We're talking about what happened with locomotives going back almost 5 years.
Stephen, actually before that. So of the 49 billion rand, 41.5 billion rand relates to the locomotive transactions. There's a varied number of transactions. It's not just the 1064 transaction. We're also talking about the 95 locomotives which were procured way back in 2012. And so it goes back 5 to 7 years in which we're seeing all of these numbers come through. That is essentially the result of the cleanup processes at Transnet, the reviews that are taking place on contracts that were entered into a while ago, as was promised by the board and executive management earlier in the year, and also late, after the appointment of the new board.
I mean, some of this has had a starring role at the Zondo Commission already. Are you likely, do you think, to be able to get that money back? Obviously, there are various processes. I imagine it will depend on some of the actual transactions and what happened at the time. Do you think you'll be able to get the money back?
I think the key is basically around irregular expenditure is for us to just make sure that we clarify that we are receiving value for that money. The procurement processes are deemed to be irregular, whether it be following the appropriate legislation or procurement procedures internally and externally. Those are what remain key in irregular expenditure. Where we have challenges around, particularly around certain transactions, we clearly will pursue those transactions to the full extent of the law. Transnet has already commenced with certain civil proceedings against entities that have been involved in state capture or irregular expenditure where necessary.
All of this can take quite a long time.
Particularly if we are left to all of the processes that need to be followed in the legal framework, I think, yes, we have to afford all of the entities the opportunity to present their cases. But Transnet is also in discussions with some of the original equipment manufacturers to ascertain how we can go forward in the interest of not just Transnet, but South Africa at large.
Okay, and then let's talk about your profit. I'm sure a much more comfortable area to discuss. 6 billion rand, I mean, that's a substantial profit at a time when the finance minister is railing against state-owned enterprises for making losses.
I think we're fortunate in that space. As you said, we've shown top-line growth of about 1.6%. Our EBITDA was up 3.8%, largely, the 1.6%, and then obviously we put in significant cost containment measures around variable costs and discretionary expenditure. 6 billion rand is reasonably good in the current circumstances and economic climate. But I think also the fact that we've generated, just over 35 billion rand in cash as a business, to ensure that Transnet keeps its head up above water in terms of our normal debt obligations, internal obligations as well. And, the one key thing, Stephen, is that we don't want to be knocking on the doors of Treasury for any sovereign guarantees or bailouts. And we've managed to do that. And I think we're confident that we'll continue in that stead as we go forward.
You spoke about cost cutting earlier, you spoke about it now. Is there any more scope for cost cutting, or you kind of gone as deep as you can?
I think we've gone as deep as we can, and we're making sure that it's sustainable cost optimization initiatives so that we're not necessarily taking out the bone. and not destroying the business. So we are looking at sustainability very carefully. It's something that we'll continue to pursue, particularly in the discretionary area, where we have quite a significant spend in order to keep the support services open at this point in time.
I would imagine the same finance minister will be knocking on your door asking, are you going to make a similar profit next year?
Yes, I think that will be the key question, and we have to look at that. But more importantly, I think the minister will also be wanting to ask the question around a dividend in future.
You can take that call. Okay, the volume of commodities that you freighted around the country actually went down. What is that telling us about our economy?
I think we're faced with some challenges on the export market, but I think there's some very encouraging news as well. If we take the export iron ore side, we had a pretty severe incident on the iron ore line in November 2018.
That's the line from Sishen.
That's Sishen to Saldanha. We had a very strategic bridge that was damaged. It was originally envisaged to repair in about 2 to 3 weeks. We were able to do that in 7 days. We rescued that, and we managed to deliver 58.4 million tons of iron ore for the export market. I think that's quite positive. We also look at the coal line. Unfortunately, the coal line hasn't performed at its peak. A few years back we did 77 million tons. We're down to about 71 odd million tons. But again, there we had an incident in December which we suspect was sabotage and criminal, because it actually was a forceful cutting of the lines. That created a significant challenge for us to actually repair that line and bring that line back into operation. So some of these challenges continue, but there's, I think, as I said, encouraging news. If we look at manganese, for example, a few years back we were moving 5 to 7 million tons. Just now we finished moving, in the current financial year, we're reporting 14.3 million tons. So I think those are the markets that we need to look at as a business. But I think also the road to rail migration, which we talk of, is something that we have to focus on for the automotive sector, for the domestic coal markets, and to make sure that we can move sufficient product off the road that's currently there to actually bring it onto rail, which is a far better option. But I think the key for us is operational efficiencies and reliability.
I mean, anyone who's driven on the N3 anywhere, time after dark, specifically for some reason around Pietermaritzburg, I don't know why, but that's where you'll find every single truck ever made is going to be on that stretch of road. You want to remove all of that. A lot of it is auto carriers going one way, going back the other way empty. How soon do you think it'll be before you're able to actually take some of that strain off the roads?
Well, I think we're in discussions and talks with our customers in the automotive sector, who move a significant amount of volume down to the ports for export. I think that is something that's quite quick into the future. Those are some of the things that we can do. Containers are always an issue. I think the number of containers that you reference currently, for some reason, I think it's the movement of volume between the Natal corridor, or Natal up to KwaZulu-Natal up to Gauteng. That's just par for the course. A significant amount of volume is consumed in Gauteng, and even to go further up north. So I think it's something that we are constantly looking at. We cannot afford to take our eye off the ball when it comes to the road to rail migration, and every little bit will help us both as a company in Transnet, and as I said, the economic perspective and the economic impact of that is quite significant, be it to the road infrastructure and time and all of those things for key consumers.
The ANC, in fact, right now has been having a conversation around the economy and making changes to the economy. There was a time when it seemed that people would complain that one of the blockages was Transnet. In other words, we could get the stuff out of the ground, we couldn't get it to the Richards Bay coal terminal, or wherever it needed to go quickly. Do you believe that that sort of blockage idea has now gone, that Transnet is actually doing what it should be doing?
I don't think it's gone entirely. I think we must also be realistic that operationally we can achieve a lot more. Transnet needs to continue focusing on operational efficiencies. We need to make sure that we unblock not just the rail infrastructure, but the port infrastructure as well. Because at the end of the day, Stephen, I think it's critical that Transnet is a good Transnet, a working Transnet, for South Africa as an economy to grow, not just in itself, but I think on the continent.
There has obviously, and I mean, in a way, your company, Transnet, was embroiled in what we're now calling the state capture era. Are you finding incidences of corruption at a lower level that this seep through?
I think currently there's been a lot of effort that's been made in the last 18 months with the advent of the new board as it relates to governance. It's also in terms of the level of due diligence that currently exists is at a much higher state, and that is reducing the ability for corruption. Now, would we get rid of corruption in its entirety? Would be something that we can, we can debate. But I think the effort that's been made is now removing the ability for people to be corrupt and to continue with corrupt activities. We're also bringing in a lot more transparency, and that is helping along. So individuals who are aware of these things are now making things a lot more transparent and visible, and we then act on it. So whether we'll get rid of it in the short term is a debatable matter, but I think the effort is there to actually make sure that we can remove, or at least for now stop corruption, especially the magnitude that it was in the past.
Mohammed Mahomedy, thank you very much indeed for coming in tonight. Really do appreciate it. And of course, Mr. Mahomedy is the Group Chief Executive of Transnet. So